Welcome to the Rad Lab podcast presented by the chemistry department at Tennessee Tech University. I am Dr. David Dan. This is Dr. Dale Enzer. We combined have over 50 years of radiochemistry experience, and hopefully this series of podcasts you'll be able to learn many things about radiochemistry and nuclear science as we go through all the way through World War II into the present. What are we going to be talking about today, Dale?
Well, I thought we'd go back to what I consider the beginning, and that is talk about the discovery of X-rays. Back in the late 1800s, many people thought all the discoveries had been made. In fact, there was ideas that they would shut down the patent office because they didn't think there was anything new that was to be discovered. And so in November of 1895, William Röntgen, was finishing a term as the president of the University of Würzburg and had not been doing a lot of research at the time. He was a theoretical physicist, and he had published in a number of papers on the thermal conductivity of solids and liquids, specific heats of gases. But as he was getting into something, he decided to get into something new, and the idea that at that time was investigation of cathode rays. And later these were shown to be electrons. But it was a sort of a visual thing because you could fill a glass tube, and under low pressure of different gases, you exerted a high volume discharge through the tube, and you got different colors, fluorescence, and so forth. Well, at that time, people did their own work, and there wasn't a group of people as you now have a lot. And so they were also very jealous of their work. Yeah. So they did it in secret to make sure no one would scoop them. So Röntgen had a lab upstairs in the building where he lived, and he had an assistant. And the assistant was charged during the day with pumping down and getting low vacuum and building up high voltages on the discharge. But never was allowed in while Röntgen was working.
Never. So they thought everything was discovered.
Right.
So why were they so secretive, right? If they thought everything was discovered, wouldn't everyone kind of just paranoia, I guess?
Yeah. And again, at that time, you had to establish precedent. And the idea that you got it into print and you got a date associated with the paper, so that gave you precedence for that discovery.
So only if it got into print, that's the precedence.
Right.
So it's not like now where you can have notebooks with dates and everything and things like that.
And so on November 8th, 1895, Röntgen went through his normal day. Now, his normal day is different from what you and I consider a normal day. He would have a lecture in the morning. He would have lunch or dinner in the midday, and that was their main meal. And usually after that, he might have a nap or maybe play a game of something or so forth, a game of cards or some sort of thing. And then he would go to the lab and work in the lab until late in the evening, say 8 or 9 o'clock, and then have a small meal before he went to bed.
Wow.
That was sort of his schedule.
Well, I wish the nap thing was still around.
Yeah, well, wait till you get older, it may be.
Maybe, yeah.
So what Röntgen was wanting to do is change his research to looking at the cathode ray tubes. And a colleague had published or shown a little bit where he had replaced he had put a thin aluminum window in the cathode ray tube and was actually seeing these rays outside of the tube for a very short distance. And Röntgen's idea was, well, if I could improve that and get them outside, then I could do all sorts of experiments with them. And so that was sort of the driving force for him to do this. So he would wait until dark, which was around in November of that year. It was somewhere around 4:30 in his part of Germany. Then it let his eyes adjust to the darkness and completely blacked out the room. So you're talking probably 30 more minutes, and had built a cover over his cathode ray tube so that he wouldn't get the light from the cathode rays inside the tube. And so he was experimenting with this and noticed that about 9 feet away from him, he was seeing a light. And he didn't understand it, but he was finally able to show that this light was directly related to the cathode ray tube.
Yeah.
But it was appearing at a not in the direction of where the cathode rays go.
Oh, okay.
It was appearing at 90-degree angle away from the cathode rays.
Gotcha.
And it turned out that this was a piece of paper that he had painted with barium platinocyanide, which is a fluorescent material. And so he thought first he was visualizing this, and he didn't think it was true.
Yeah.
But he was able to turn the switch to the cathode ray tube on and off, and the fluorescence appeared and disappeared, appeared and disappeared, so he could relate it back to that.
Well, how lucky is that, right?
Well, it first of all, it was lucky he spotted it 9 feet away if you're concentrating on what you're doing. And so he even didn't, he was so intent on this that for the next 6 weeks, all he did was work every night up in his lab, looking at and trying to identify what these rays were. Now, you come to the question of what to name them.
Yeah.
Well, he realized from his discussion or his investigation that these were rays similar to UV light. And so he thought initially, well, there's UV, and then the next letter would be W. But he thought that was too close. And then he remembered that X in math is the unknown. And so he then came up with the term X-ray.
Wow. So that's how X-ray came about.
That's the term.
Wow.
What he began to do in investigating the X-rays is he wanted to have a measure of how far these X-rays went, and he needed a very accurate measure of the distance. So guess what he brought with him to measure the distance that these X-rays go?
A measuring tape? No.
2 decks of cards.
2 decks of cards.
Play cards.
Yeah.
Because they have a specific, they're identical in nature, have identical thicknesses.
Yeah.
And so he thought he would be able to put 1, 2, 3, 4, and
oh, wow.
and being able to measure.
Yeah.
What he found was
went right through
and didn't stop. And so he began to investigate other things, and he found that as the density increased, then the stopping power to the X-rays increased. He even took a picture of weights in a box and he realized that it went through the wood, but the weights, the metal weights that were in the box, were visible on a photographic plate.
Wow.
And this then gave him the idea that the photographic plates were the ideal way to investigate. And so one thing led to another. And again, he's doing all this by himself.
Yeah.
He is not letting his assistant in. His wife thinks he is probably gone a little nuts because he is disappearing and not reappearing every night.
So he didn't even tell his wife what was going on?
No.
Wow.
Well, what happened then was he decided that, I bet he saw when he would hold his hand over the x-ray plate that he was getting just a slight shadow of his hand on these x-ray plates as he held things underneath. And then he thought, well, maybe we could take a picture. And so who was he going to? He couldn't take a picture of himself because he was too busy doing all the things around him needed to do to get the x-ray tube working correctly. So he brought his wife Bertha to the lab.
There you go. That's how she finds out.
And she had never participated before, didn't know what he was doing. He simply told her, hold your hand over top of the photographic plate for several minutes and be very quiet. And so from that, you get the famous picture of her hand with a wedding ring. And you can see the wedding ring, and it's her hand. You see the bones. And this is the first time that anybody had seen inside the body.
Without them being dead.
Right.
Yeah.
And at that time, when he showed her the picture, the idea of skeleton was mainly associated with death. And so she was completely blown out
away, yeah.
and would never set foot in his lab again. So, as I said, he worked for 6 weeks, and he had developed various photographs of her hand, of other objects that he could take pictures of. And so right around Christmas of 1895, he wrote to the local physiological society and said, I have a paper that I would like to have put in to your latest edition. And so he submitted that, but at the same time, he posted a copy of this with the photographs to a number of physicists in Europe, in London, Paris, Vienna, Berlin, and sent them out on New Year's Eve to get his priority established.
So he sent this to a bunch of journals or a bunch of just other scientists?
Colleagues, other scientists, some that he knew and some that he knew by reputation.
Yeah. And that was just to establish like that this is his work.
Yeah. This is what I've been doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he wasn't, I guess he understood how much work it took to get all that, so he wasn't worried about someone scooping him after sending that out.
No, but he was he did this so that he established his precedent. And so what happened then is somebody released these photographs to a news journalist, and they got published in the newspaper, and people saw this. And so within, I guess it was maybe by February, they were starting to use x-rays for diagnostic determination of broken bones.
So a month later.
Yeah, within a month.
They were already using x-rays to diagnose medically.
Right.
Like, wow.
And now Röntgen won the first Nobel Prize in physics. When they asked him for a quote, they said, what were you thinking when you were doing all this work? And he said, "I did not think, I investigated."
Great science quote right there.
Yeah.
So, man, that's crazy to think that after just a month, they saw the practicality of it and immediately put it into work, I guess.
Yes.
So it was in hospitals and everything.
Yeah. Now, the one thing that happened is that they had no idea about the physical damage that X-rays could occur. Now, Röntgen had his set up where he actually had a booth which had all the operating switches in that he would go to and use when he was using the X-ray. Plus, he would turn it off and on. But some of the other people that began using this did not do that. In fact, one of the first ways they determined how intense the X-ray beam was, is they would hold the back of their hand underneath the beam and count the seconds it took for it to turn red.
Whoa. Oh my goodness.
But within about several years, they already realized there has been some deaths of X-ray technicians.
Yeah.
And so they realized the damage that it had to do. So, start putting in precautions, and that's why when you go get your bite wings done, they lay lead apron over you.
Yeah, and then they run around the wall,
Right.
wall to press the button. Yeah. Wow, man, that's crazy. They used their own hand and just waited for it to get red.
Yeah, that was an early way they tested the intensity.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So how long did that take again? Like for them to start realizing, okay, maybe this is a little bit more dangerous than.
It was a couple of years.
So they were just, well, I guess chronic exposure, I guess.
Yeah. But I mean, it was during World War I, Marie Curie ran these they were called little Curies, but they were vehicles with X-ray machines in them. And I think there were, I've forgotten how many, but they were called little Curies. And she ran one of them, her daughter ran another, and they would go to wherever the battlefields and X-ray soldiers to identify the shrapnel or broken bones and whatever.
Wow. Man, so yeah, that's crazy how quick and how quickly they designed things to make it useful in that sense, even having vehicles that had them. Wow. So, and like it also permeated not just like the medical field, right? It was like in everyday life too. Like other than just when you went to the hospital with like shoes and things like that, when you get your shoes.
They started looking at fitting of shoes. They had Thomas Edison. A lot of people think Thomas Edison was the one that discovered X-rays.
Yeah, he stole a lot of things.
Yeah, but he developed the. I'm trying to remember what they called it, but it was basically a visual scope with X-rays, and the X-rays are running all the time.
Oh,
that
my
you
goodness.
put your body or your feet in them.
See how close they are to the front. No, you didn't have to feel your toes anymore. You just you could look through the scope. Wow, that's crazy. And you never used one of those.
I've seen them. I remember seeing them as when I was growing up. My parents never would let me put my feet in them. I wanted to.
You wanted to,
because I wanted to see what my toes, the bones in my. Yeah. But they would never let me use it.
Well, maybe once would have been okay, but if you were playing with it, maybe. Well, are you happy they didn't let you do it then?
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, wow, that's crazy. That's crazy how quickly it all came together and how they thought they knew everything. I guess at that point.
Oh, one other thing I meant to mention about Röntgen is he did not patent the system.
Never patented it.
Never patented it because he gave it to the world.
Wow. So. I could never imagine a scientist doing that nowadays.
Probably
it's
not.
About there's too much money wrapped up in everything. Imagine how much money he would have made if he patented that.
Yeah.
Like especially how quick, but maybe it wouldn't have permeated through the medical field and everything as quickly if he patented it and all that stuff. So we're thankful for that, again, in a lot of ways. Wow, man, I don't think I would do that. I think if I created something figured something out like that, I probably would have patented it. But man, wow.
Yeah.
Noble of him, yeah.
Yeah, and so he did not benefit financially from the discovery.
Did he get a lot of lectures? Did he make money? Did he die poor?
He donated the Nobel Prize to the university.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, great guy. This is a great guy.
Mm-hmm.
Man. Wow. So he just lived a normal life after that.
Pretty much, because he won the Nobel Prize and turned down professorships at a number of large universities because he was happy where he was.
Well, if you're happy, that's all you need, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow. Hey, great guy. Great scientist, great guy. Well, I guess that wraps up the first episode of the Rad Lab podcast, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one, and we'll see you next time.